My name is Celine. In my first life, I died bitter, regretful, and painfully alone in a sterile hospital room, the slow creep of cancer claiming me. The last face I saw wasn't that of a weeping lover or a devoted family member. It was the fluorescent light panel on the ceiling, humming a dull, eternal note. My husband, a quiet man named Cale whom I had married in a fit of petty defiance against my parents and the world, was not there. I had sent him away hours before, with the same cold dismissal I'd wielded like a weapon for 5 years. I believed my consciousness would simply end. It did not. Instead, I found myself untethered, a wisp of awareness trailing after Cale like smoke from a dying ember. For 3 months I watched. I watched a man I thought I knew unravel into someone I had never bothered to see. The funeral was a small, bleak affair. My parents, their faces rigid with a grief I'd never allowed them to express while I lived, stood apart. Cale stood alone by the fresh earth, his mechanic's hands, usually stained with oil and grit, clenched into white-knuckled fists at his sides. He didn't cry. His silence was a cavern. A week later, a matchmaker came to his small, cluttered house, the one I'd never bothered to make a home. She was all false cheer and pragmatic calculation. A strapping man like you shouldn't be alone, Cale. I have a lovely girl from the next town, very understanding. He didn't let her finish. In a voice so low and dangerous it made my spectral form quiver, he said, "Get out." When she protested, he physically escorted her to the door. The woman, flustered and insulted, spat her parting shot. "Who do you think you are? A broke mechanic living in this hovel. You'll die alone." The door slammed. He leaned against it, head bowed. And then I heard it, a raw, broken whisper to the empty space I once occupied. "I already am." That was when the real revelations began. I followed him to the bank, saw the hollow defeat in his eyes as a teller explained, with polite finality, that the international transfer he'd desperately pursued for experimental treatment had been a scam. Every penny he'd saved, every asset he'd liquidated from the auto shop he loved, gone. Vanished into the digital ether, along with my last shred of hope. He hadn't just lost his money, he'd lost his chance to save me, and he carried that failure like a millstone. I watched him on Sundays. He would clean up, put on his one good shirt and drive to the old stone temple on the hill. Not to pray for fortune or peace. He would light a single stick of incense, place it before a quiet altar and bow his head. I drifted close once, close enough to hear the murmur that slipped from his lips. "Please, let me find her again. In the next life, let me stay by her side. Let me do better." He wasn't praying for my peace. He was praying for another chance. For me. The woman who had thrown dishes, who had demanded a divorce monthly like a twisted ritual, who had sneered at his grease-stained clothes and his quiet, steadfast presence. The weight of my own contempt crushed me, a ghost being suffocated by memories. I had never been kind. I had married him because he was the antithesis of everything my wealthy, controlling parents wanted. A solid, unpolished, working-class man. I used my disappointment in life as a whip to lash out at the one person who refused to leave. I remembered the worst night, the drawer, the half-empty packet of pills. The horrible, unforgivable lie I told just to wound him. And through it all, this man had loved me. Deeply, silently, and with a fortitude that shattered my understanding of love itself. It was a love that persisted not in spite of my cruelty, but absorbing it, a dark star pulling in all light and giving nothing back. The 3 months ended not with a fade but a violent pull. A sensation of being wrung out and rewound. I gasped, my eyes flying open to a kaleidoscope of red and gold. A red silk bedsheet. The heavy, embroidered fabric of a traditional wedding quilt. The scent of perfume, sweat, and faintly fireworks. I was lying in the ornate marital bed in Cale's house. Our house. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic living drum. I pushed myself up, the heavy bridal headdress pulling at my hair. The room was as I dimly remembered it from a lifetime ago. Slightly shabby but scrubbed clean for the occasion, red, characters glowing on the walls. And there he was. Cale stood with his back to me, bending to retrieve his black suit jacket from the floor. His shoulders, broad and strong under the crisp white dress shirt, were tense. The memory slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. Our wedding banquet. The drunken, nostalgic chatter of old friends. Leo, my bubbly, tactless classmate, slurring, "A shame, Celine." You and Julian were the golden couple. If he hadn't gone overseas. I had laughed, the wine making me loose and reckless, playing the role of the wistful, jilted lover. Tell me about it, I'd sighed loud enough to be heard. I've been saving myself all this time and he never came back to claim the prize. I'd turned then and caught Cale's eyes over the crowd. They were not angry. They were hollow. A shutter slamming down. He had said nothing, simply turned and walked away. The celebration had curdled in my mouth. Now on our wedding night he was leaving. In my first life I'd let him. I'd felt a petty triumph, lying alone in the bed, thinking I'd won some stupid silent battle. Now the thought filled me with terror. He straightened, jacket in hand, and turned toward the door. Don't go. The words left my lips before I could think. They were raw, stripped of the icy disdain I usually armored myself with. Cale froze. His hand was on the doorknob. He didn't turn. Panic, pure and undiluted, surged through me. I scrambled from the bed, the cumbersome wedding robes tangling around my legs. I stumbled forward and did the one thing I had never in 2 lifetimes done. I wrapped my arms around his waist from behind, pressing my cheek against the strong plane of his back. He went absolutely still. Then a fine, uncontrollable tremor ran through him, vibrating into my own body. It was the tremor of a bowstring pulled too tight. A sound escaped him. A low, bitter laugh that held no humor. You don't have to hold on to me for him anymore, Celine. Gut. He knew exactly where to plunge the knife. And he was right. In his mind, that's all this was. A performance for an absent audience. A continuation of the joke from the banquet. Cale, no, I whispered, my voice muffled against his shirt. It smelled of clean cotton and his unique scent. Metal, soap, and something indefinably solid. That night, I was just joking with Leo. It was stupid. I wasn't saving myself for anyone. I was just scared. He was silent for a long moment. I could feel the rapid, heavy beat of his heart. Then carefully he pried my hands from his waist. His fingers were warm and rough. He turned to face me and his gaze was like shards of winter sky, sharp, cold, and painfully clear. Funny, he said, his voice quiet. You never said who he was. My heart sank. This was the pattern I remembered. My carelessness, his quiet observation, my defensive silence, his retreat. A closed loop of misunderstanding. I had learned over time to speak in riddles he couldn't unravel, leaving him in the dark. Now my honesty was my undoing. It was Julian, I said, forcing myself to hold his gaze. It's always been Julian in those stories. But it's over, Cale. It has been for years. The joke was in poor taste. I'm sorry. He stared at me, his expression unreadable. The hope that had flickered in me died. He didn't believe me. He saw the apology as strategy, not sentiment. With a slow shake of his head, he turned back to the door. Cale, please. The desperation was real, clawing at my throat. I'm telling the truth. His hand paused on the knob. Then we'll talk about your truth tomorrow. When the wine has worn off. And the nostalgia. The door opened and closed with a soft, final click. I was alone again. In our wedding room. Just like before. But this time, a hot, fierce resolve burned through the cold shock. No. Not again. I had been given a second chance, a grotesque and miraculous gift. I had seen the end of the road, the lonely death, the man lighting incense for a ghost. I would not walk that path again. The night was long and sleepless. I heard the distant rumble of his old truck leaving, heading back toward his auto shop. His sanctuary. In my first life he'd slept there for a month before returning, a tense, distant roommate. This time I wouldn't let the silence fester. I would bridge this chasm I had carved with my own 2 hands. The memory of his prayer in the temple echoed in my soul. Let me stay by her side. This time, I thought, my eyes staring into the dark, I will be worthy of you staying. The week that followed was an exercise in exquisite frustration. Cale was a ghost in his own home. Or rather, I was the ghost haunting a space he rarely occupied. He returned only to shower, change, and collect tools, moving with a quiet, efficient detachment that built a wall between us more impenetrable than any argument. I tried. I made breakfast, which sat untouched until I threw it away at noon. I left hesitant notes, shop closes at 8, that received no reply. The silence was worse than the shouting matches of my memory. This was a man who had decided to disengage, to survive me by retreating. I had taught him this. My only lifeline was my knowledge of the future, a grim script I was desperate to rewrite. I knew the illness was a time bomb in my body, but it was too soon to seek diagnosis without seeming insane. I knew the financial ruin the scam would bring, but I had no details to warn him. All I had was the aching, visceral memory of his grief, and the determination that it would not be for me again. 5 days after the wedding, Leo came to visit, his face a cartoon of guilt. "Celine. Oh man, I am so sorry. My big mouth. Did you and Kale, you know?" I waved him off, leaning against the door frame. "It's fine, Leo. Really. We'll work it out." He nodded, relieved. Good. Newlyweds shouldn't fight. Just talk it through." Then his expression shifted, a flicker of gossipy excitement. "Hey, so you'll never guess. I heard from Mark, Julian's coming back. For good." The world tilted. In my first timeline, Julian's return had been a vague rumor that solidified a month later. This was too soon. The butterfly effect of my changed actions, my attempt to cling to Kale that first night, was already altering the wind. "When?" I asked, my voice strangely flat. Leo misread my tone for shock. "Soon, I think. I might have messaged him about your wedding. He didn't take it well. Sounded like he broke something." He winced. "Sorry again. But hey, you're married now. Water under the bridge, right?" "Right," I echoed hollowly. "Married." After Leo left, a cold dread settled in my stomach. Julian. My golden youth, my great what if. Our breakup had been a slow, ugly collapse. After 5 years, when I gently broached the future, he'd accused me of pressuring him, of not believing in his potential. The final blow was when my parents called him traditional and direct, to discuss engagement. He told them bluntly he had no intention of being tied down. The humiliation had been absolute. I'd packed my things from our shared apartment that night, my love curdling into something hard and resentful. 3 years of silence had done the rest. If I thought of him at all now, it was with the distant pity one reserves for a natural disaster that passed by. But his early return was a complication I didn't need, a specter from a past life threatening my fragile present. Kale hadn't answered a single call or text. I knew waiting was a losing strategy. On my day off, I moved. I cooked a meal I remembered him loving, a spicy ginger beef stir-fry, fragrant and steaming, and packed it carefully. The sky threatened rain, but I drove to the auto shop anyway. Kale's Precision Auto was etched on a modest sign. The bay doors were open, revealing the shadowy innards of cars on lifts. The smell of gasoline, rubber, and metal was overwhelmingly him. My heart pounded as I stepped inside, the first fat drops of rain beginning to fall. The ground floor was empty of mechanics. Only a man in a well-tailored charcoal suit stood near a sleek, expensive sedan, examining an invoice. A customer. I gave him a cursory glance and headed for the stairs to the small upstairs apartment where Kale sometimes stayed. "Celine." The voice stopped me cold. Smooth, cultured, laced with a familiar, intimate surprise. I turned slowly. Julian. 3 years had refined him. The boyish softness was gone, replaced by the sharp angles of a successful man. His hair was perfectly styled, his watch glinted expensively. He looked like the fulfillment of every promise he'd ever made, except the ones he'd made to me. He closed the distance quickly, his eyes bright. "I thought they gave me the wrong address. I can't believe you live near here. How have you been?" The polite distance I'd mustered felt brittle. "I've been fine, Julian." I moved to sidestep him, the food container heavy in my hands. He reached out, his fingers circling my wrist. The touch was a violation. "Celine, wait. Are you still angry? You know, your mother, she was so aggressive that day. I said things I didn't mean. I've done a lot of thinking. We should get married. I came back for you." I stared at him, at this handsome stranger spinning a fantasy. I knew the truth his polished facade hid. A truth I'd learned only as a ghost, overhearing his frantic calls to a lawyer overseas. He had gotten married abroad within a year of our breakup. He had a child. This was not a man back to reclaim lost love. This was a man tasting forbidden fruit, intrigued by the idea of a woman who was no longer his. I pulled my hand free and lifted my left hand, where my simple gold wedding band gleamed. "I'm married, Julian." He didn't even blink. A faint, knowing smile touched his lips. "I know. They told me. But you and I both know, he lowered his voice to that old coaxing timbre that once made my heart flip. This is just your way of punishing me, isn't it? You're still mad. Tell me, what can I do? I was speechless. The sheer, staggering arrogance of it. I am really married. This shop belongs to my husband. All right, he said lightly as if humoring me. Then why don't you call him out? I'd like to meet the man who won you. The next second, a deep, calm voice cut through the drumming rain. You looking for me? Cale stood in the doorway leading from the back office. He must have come in through the rear. He was in his work clothes. A gray Henley stretched across his shoulders, dark jeans stained with streaks of grease. Rain glistened in his dark hair. He looked utterly solid, real, and dangerously still as his eyes took in the scene. Julian close to me holding a container of home-cooked food. He walked forward, not to Julian but to me, inserting himself physically between us. His presence was a wall, a shelter. Relief made me weak. I reached out, fingers brushing the damp, coarse fabric of his sleeve. Cale. I'm soaked. Without looking at me, his gaze fixed on Julian, he said, there are clothes upstairs. It was the first direct thing he'd said to me in a week. A simple, practical instruction. Felt like a lifeline. Okay, I said softly. I turned to go, but Julian's voice, laced with a challenge, stopped me. Celine, wait. I glanced back at Cale. His expression didn't change. He's here for a transmission flush, Cale stated, his tone flat, professional. A customer. The unspoken command was clear. Go. I went upstairs. The small apartment was Spartan. A couch, a small fridge, a neatly made bed. I found one of his white cotton work shirts and changed into it. It swam on me, the hem brushing mid-thigh. My wet clothes were ruined. Looking for a hairdryer, I found none. The rain was a roar on the metal roof. I went to the top of the stairs. Cale. I called. My voice was swallowed by the storm. Sighing, I patted back down. The two men were standing by Julian's car. Cale was pointing at something under the hood, his explanation technical and curt. When he saw me, his eyes dropped to my bare legs and his entire body went rigid. In 2 strides he was at a workbench, snatching a heavy oil-stained shop jacket. He wrapped it firmly around my waist, tying the sleeves in a rough knot. His voice was a low, sharp growl near my ear. Who told you to come down here like that? The heat in his words wasn't anger at me, I realized with a jolt. It was possession. It was fury that another man was seeing me in his shirt. A wild, impossible hope bloomed in my chest. I leaned into him, my head resting lightly on his chest. I couldn't find the hairdryer. I'm cold. He hesitated, his body taut. You could have called. I did, I whispered. The rain was too loud. You didn't hear me. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing, simply took my hand and turned to lead me back upstairs. Celine, Julian's voice cut in, smooth and insistent. Can we talk? Just for a minute. Before I could form a refusal, Cale turned. The polite mechanic vanished. In his place was a man with a dangerously quiet edge. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing the corded strength of his forearms. He didn't smile. My wife's dressed in my shirt, Cale said, each word a chip of ice. And you still want a conversation? Julian's polished composure cracked slightly. This is between me and her. Cale's laugh was a short, dry sound. He slid an arm around my waist, pulling me firmly against his side. The gesture was undeniable. Too bad. Anything concerning her concerns me. You talk to me. The air crackled. Julian's eyes darkened. Fine. Can I at least have her number? To sort out the car. Without hesitation, Cale pulled a business card from his back pocket. Call the shop. From the small security monitor upstairs, I watched Julian leave, his face a mask of fury. He didn't wait for his service. He just got in his car and sped off into the downpour, spraying gravel. Cale finished the lockup in silence. On the drive home, the tension in the truck was a live wire. He gripped the wheel, his profile stark in the intermittent streetlights. He'd been provoked, and the primal protective side of him I'd only glimpsed in my ghostly observations was now front and center. When we got home, he slammed the truck door with a force that echoed. I followed him inside, quiet as a mouse. He went straight to the bathroom. As soon as I heard the shower turn on, I acted. I went to the front door, turned the deadbolt and slipped the key into the pocket of the shirt, his shirt, that I still wore. A few minutes later, a knock rattled the bathroom door. You locked the front door? I turned off the water, smiling to myself. Did I? Where's the key? I jingled it behind the door. Right here. Silence. A long, heavy silence. When I emerged, wrapped in a towel, he was gone from the living room. I wasn't worried. I found him in the guest room, lying on his back on top of the covers, shirtless. The lamp cast a warm glow over the defined planes of his chest and abdomen, over muscles earned by physical labor, not a gym. He was strength incarnate, and he was trying to shut me out. I walked over and sat on the edge of the bed. Cale. He didn't open his eyes, but a faint tremor ran through him. My courage, born of a second chance and fueled by the memory of his lonely prayers, coalesced. I let the towel drop. In one fluid motion, I lifted the blanket and slid in beside him, my cool skin pressing against the furnace heat of his body. He jolted upright as if electrocuted, but I was ready. I shifted, straddling his lap, pinning him beneath me. His eyes flew open, wide and stormy. The veins in his neck stood out. Celine. His voice was a ragged, frustrated rasp. Don't. Not like this. Not to prove a point to him. I leaned down, my damp hair creating a curtain around our faces. I kissed him. Not a timid peck, but a soft, deliberate press of my lips to his. They were firm, unyielding at first. Cale, I whispered against his mouth. I'm ready now. His hands, which had been clenched into fists at his sides, slowly uncurled. His gaze searched my face, looking for the lie, the hesitation, the performance. He saw only my resolve, my apology, my plea. With a groan that seemed torn from the depths of him, his restraint shattered. He flipped us over in a controlled surge of power, his body caging mine. This was not the careful, hesitant lover from my first fragmented memories. This was a man unleashing years of suppressed want, of hurt, of devotion he'd been forced to hide. It was overwhelming. Acclaiming. A conversation without words where every touch shouted, "You are mine." I met him, touch for touch, kiss for kiss, trying to pour a lifetime of missed affection into a single night. When I cried out, half in pleasure, half in overwhelmed sensation, he gentled, but only just. Afterward, spent and boneless, I drifted in his arms toward sleep, the world finally righting itself. Then just as sleep claimed me, he shifted, pulling me upright against his chest. Wake up. I blinked, dazed. What's wrong? His eyes burned into mine in the dark. That man came to my shop. And you have nothing to say? The ghost of Julian threatened to ruin the first real peace we'd found. Exhaustion and frustration warred in me. Julian, I don't know what to say, Cale. I didn't invite him. I'll find out who told him where we were. He studied me, his gaze penetrating. You swear? You didn't tell him? I swear, I said, the truth ringing clear in my tired voice. I have no idea. He watched me for a long moment, then finally, seeing my utter depletion, he relented. He laid us back down, tucking me against him. Tomorrow, he murmured into my hair, a promise and a threat. We find out. I nodded, already half gone. Tomorrow. Curled in the circle of his arms, the storm outside finally quieting, I slept. And for the first time since my death, I did not dream of the end. I dreamed of the beginning I had missed, and the future I was determined to steal back from fate. I didn't dream of the cold hospital room. Instead, I tumbled into a fractured kaleidoscope of memories from my first life, moments I'd walled off and labeled unhappy, but that now shimmered with a different, painful light. We weren't always frost and silence. Before the great chill settled, there were flashes of ordinary warmth. A shared laugh over a burnt dinner, his large hands surprisingly deft as he tried to salvage it. A Sunday drive with no destination, his work-roughened fingers laced loosely with mine on the gear shift. The quiet contentment of reading in the same room, him with a car manual, me with a novel, a companionable silence that felt like peace. The turning point, the first real crack in our fragile foundation, replayed itself with brutal clarity. I'd been napping, worn out from another petty argument. He'd made mapo tofu my favorite, the spicy scent pulling me from sleep. He came into the bedroom to wake me, his expression soft, hopeful, a peace offering. But I'd been on the phone with my mother earlier, her criticisms about my wasted potential and working-class husband, still ringing in my ears. In a fit of spite, I dug out an old half-used packet of birth control pills from the back of a drawer, a relic from before him. I wasn't taking them. It was a prop, a symbol of my own fabricated rebellion. He saw me snap the drawer shut too quickly. "Celine," he asked, his voice still gentle. "What are you hiding?" "Nothing," I'd snapped, the ugliness inside me seeking a target. He didn't argue. He just walked over, opened the drawer and picked up the packet. The hope in his eyes died, replaced by a confusion so deep it looked like physical pain. We'd stopped using protection months ago. He'd been talking about converting the spare room, had brought home paint samples, soft yellows and greens. Why, was all he could manage. And I, wanting to hurt him for the hurt the world inflicted on me, met his gaze with icy defiance. "Because I don't want to have your child." I saw him break. It wasn't dramatic. It was a quiet, internal collapse. His hand, the one not holding the packet, slammed into the window beside us. The glass cracked into a spider web, blood welling instantly from his knuckles. Yet even through the shock and pain he tried. He took a shuddering breath, his voice trembling with a desperate control. "Tell me what's wrong. There's a reason. Just tell me." I doubled down, welding my lie into a prison for us both. "There's nothing wrong. I just don't want it." The nursery dreams were packed away the next week. The paint cans sat untouched, then disappeared. A cold, formal distance descended, thicker than any wall. We were ghost sharing a house. Eventually I couldn't stand the silence and screamed for a divorce. He agreed instantly, calmly. And in my fury at his calm, I hurled the ultimate cruelty. "If you won't divorce me, then you can forget ever having a child." That's when he'd opened the same drawer, pulled out a different piece of paper and laid it flat on the table between us. It was a positive pregnancy test from a few weeks prior. One I hadn't even known about. His voice was whisper quiet, shattered. "Then this baby, you ended it yourself, didn't you?" The truth was a sick, helpless tragedy. I'd had early miscarriages. Chemical pregnancies. My body, unbeknownst to me, was already fighting the illness that would kill me. But in that moment, proud and vicious, I couldn't admit weakness, couldn't admit my body had failed. So I took the blame for a crime I didn't commit. I met his shattered gaze and nodded. "Yes, I did." The look in his eyes, it haunted my first life and my dreams now. It was the death of hope. Only after I died, floating unseen, did I learn he visited the temple every year on the date that test was taken, lighting incense for the child we never had. "Celine." "Hey." A hand warm and solid touched my cheek. I jerked awake, my throat raw, my face wet. Cale was leaning over me, his brow furrowed, his eyes dark with concern. "You're burning up," he murmured, his palm moving to my forehead. "You were crying in your sleep." "Talking." A bolt of pure terror shot through me. What did I say? Did I whisper about the baby? The pills? The cancer? What did I say? I croaked. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached for a digital thermometer on the nightstand and pressed it to my temple. It beeped. "High fever," he stated, his voice gruff. "My fault. I shouldn't have let you get chilled last night." The simple admission of guilt for something that wasn't truly his fault undid me. I glared weakly. "It is your fault. I told you to stop." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. My fault. Here, sit up. Medicine." He was meticulous in his care, propping pillows, bringing water, watching me swallow the pills. The stern, hurt man from the week before was gone, replaced by a version so attentive it made my heart ache. Emboldened by the fever or the remnants of the dream, I let my eyes roam over him. He'd pulled on sweatpants but was still shirtless, the defined lines of his abdomen leading down in a way that was unfairly attractive. "You know," I said, my voice hoarse, "I don't think I've ever told you how ridiculously handsome you are." He stilled, a faint pink tinging the tops of his ears. He tried to maintain his stern composure. "What are you playing at?" I sighed, a dramatic, feverish sound. "Such a waste, though. All this," I gestured vaguely at him, "going unused. A tragedy." His eyes darkened. "Celine," he warned, his voice dropping. "You're sick. Don't start fires you can't put out." I grinned, a weak but mischievous thing, and reached out to trace a finger down the center of his chest. He caught my wrist, his grip firm, his gaze locked on mine. The playfulness evaporated. "Then tell me about your ex showing up at my shop," he said, his tone leaving no room for evasion. "What was that?" The whiplash was brutal. I deflated, the brief moment of lightness gone. I told you I don't know. I've asked someone to look into it. I expected more interrogation, but he just nodded, a sharp, accepting motion. Let me know when you find something. I blinked. You're not mad. Go to sleep, he muttered, tucking the blankets around me with a gentleness that belied his words. Stop talking nonsense. The reprieve was short-lived. That night my phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from an unknown number. Celine, it's Julian. We need to talk. Before I could delete it, the same number rang. On instinct, I fumbled and hit accept. Celine. His voice was smooth, intimate in the dark room. Are you free? Let's have dinner. There's something I need to tell you. Kale was in the shower. The rush of water was a distant roar. My voice turned to ice. I'm not free. Then when will you be? I can wait. Any time is fine. The casual presumption ignited my temper. What do you want, Julian? What could you possibly have to say to me at this hour? A pause, then a soft, loaded sigh. I just want to see you. Just once. Are you insane? I hissed, keeping my voice low. Texting me, calling me in the middle of the night? I'm married. Happily. I've never thought about leaving him and I never will. So, calling. Me. I hung up before he could respond, my hands trembling. This wasn't the Julian of my past or even the Julian of my first future. This was something else. Obsessive, unmoored. A horrible thought, cold and slick, coiled in my stomach. Could he know? Could he somehow be chasing a ghost too? But even if that were true, it changed nothing. My choice was made. It was Kale. It had always been Kale, I just hadn't had the eyes to see it. The next morning, determined to clear my head, I went for a walk. The moment I stepped into the small courtyard of our apartment complex, I froze. Julian stood there, holding a bouquet of white Casablanca lilies. My favorite flower from a lifetime ago. My expression hardened into stone. How did you find where I live? He approached, his smile bright, rehearsed. I was passing a florist. Saw these. Remembered how much you loved them. I don't want them. My voice was flat. And I haven't liked lilies in years. His smile faltered. But I used to bring them every week. People change, I said, the words final. He looked at me as if I'd struck him. Do you have to be so cruel? Before I could answer, he pressed on, earnestness plastered over his arrogance. I know everything now, Celine. You met him on a blind date, right? A setup by your parents. There were no real feelings. Everyone says you only married him to get back at me. But I'm here now. We can start over. We can be happy again. The partial truth in his words was a gut punch. Yes, the blind date had been a setup. Yes, I'd been defiant. But the feeling that grew for Kale, the deep, silent, enduring love I'd witnessed from beyond the grave, that was the most real thing in any of my lives. Love isn't a constant, Julian, I said slowly, each word measured. And no one is obliged to wait forever for someone who walked away. Please, stop this. My husband won't be pleased, and if you continue, I will call the police. I turned to leave. Wait, he called out. One more thing. The class reunion. End of the month. I really hope you'll come. I was about to refuse to sever this last thread. But then I thought of the whispers, the pitying looks, the narrative he was already spinning. I thought of Kale and the invisible wall of doubt my past created. This could be an opportunity. To stand beside Kale in front of everyone and rewrite the story. I looked back, meeting his hopeful gaze with cool indifference. All right. A smile of victory touched his lips. Then, can I at least have a goodbye hug? For old time's sake. He moved faster than I anticipated, stepping forward and wrapping his arms around me before I could react. A wave of visceral disgust rolled through me. His cologne was expensive, wrong. His embrace felt like a cage. I shoved against his chest. What the hell are you two doing? Kale's voice was a whip crack of rage from the building entrance. I shoved Julian with all my strength, sending him stumbling back. I didn't look at him again. I ran to Kale and threw my arms around him, burying my face in his chest. He hugged me. It was disgusting. Kale was trembling with suppressed fury, his breathing harsh. I peeked up and saw his gaze fixed on Julian, cold and murderous. Julian's face had transformed. All pretense of gentle remorse was gone, replaced by a dark, icy fury. Celine, Kale's voice was taut, a wire about to snap. Go inside. Now. I clung to his hand. No. We go together. When he frowned, I whispered, urgent and low, he's not worth it. Fighting him just gives him what he wants. A reaction. You'll only get angry for nothing. Let's just go home. I felt the tension in his arm ease just a fraction. My words had reached him. With a final, searing glare at Julian, he turned, keeping me firmly at his side. Let's go. Later, I heard from a gossipy classmate that Julian got violently drunk that night, muttering my name over and over. I felt nothing but a distant contempt, because I remembered another truth learned in my ghostly state. While overseas, Julian had married. He had a 2-year-old daughter. This performance wasn't love. It was toxic nostalgia and possession. My health improved and I urged Kale to focus on the shop. He'd started coming home for dinner, a routine that felt like a fragile new beginning. But one evening, 10 p.m. came and went with no sign of him. A knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. I drove to the shop. The new apprentice, a young guy named Ben, looked panicked when he saw me. Mrs. Thorne. Kale, he got taken to the police station. That guy from before, the suit? He came back, started saying things. Kale lost his temper. You should go. The drive to the station was a blur. Kale didn't lose his temper. He absorbed temper. For him to react. At the station, the scene explained everything. Julian sat on a bench, one eye purpling, his lips split. He looked like a ruined doll. Kale sat straight-backed across from him, calm, but with a tightness around his eyes that spoke of violent restraint. I went straight to Kale, my hands flying to his face, his arms. Are you hurt? Let me see. He caught my hands. Not here, he said quietly, glancing at the officers. But as he moved, he couldn't suppress a sharp inhale. I followed his gaze to his shoulder, visible through his torn t-shirt. A massive dark bruise was already blooming across his collarbone and down his arm. I turned to the nearest officer, my voice steady and cold. We'd like an injury assessment, please. Julian's head snapped up. The hurt in his eyes was theatrical, profound. Celine, you're asking for a report for him. I stared at him, all my contempt laid bare. Yes. And I'm also filing a report for property damage and assault. His jaw clenched. Aren't you going to ask if I'm okay? A disbelieving laugh escaped me. You attacked my husband. You trashed his shop. The fact that I'm not clawing your eyes out is my generosity. And you want me to ask how you are. He fell silent, shrinking under the officer's disapproving gaze. While we waited, I went out, bought the strongest analgesic balm I could find, and came back. In full view of Julian, I carefully applied the ointment to Kale's bruised shoulder, my touch deliberately gentle. Kale watched me, his dark eyes unreadable. 2 hours later, the security footage told the unambiguous story. Julian had stormed in, provoked, smashed a tool rack, and when Kale tried to restrain him, had thrown the first punch. Kale's single retaliatory blow was ruled self-defense. Julian was charged with disturbing the peace and vandalism. He was detained, ordered to pay for all damages. At home, as I tended to Kale's bruises in the soft light of our bedroom, he was quiet for a long time. Aren't you afraid, he asked finally, his voice a low rumble, that it might have been me who started it? I didn't hesitate. I met his gaze, my fingers stilling on his skin. No, I trust you. You wouldn't do that. A faint, almost wounded smile touched his lips. You trust me that much? I reached up, cupping his jaw. You're my husband. If I can't trust you, who can I? My taste in men isn't that poor. The smile deepened, turning wry. And if I wasn't your husband? The question hung in the air. I looked straight into the eyes of the man who loved me through death and prayed for me in temples. There is no if. No matter how many lifetimes, Kale, I'd find you. I'd choose you. I took a breath, the words feeling both utterly true and terrifyingly new. Have I ever told you that I've always liked you? Since that first day? At the cafe. His eyes widened just a fraction. The memory of our first mistaken meeting hung between us. A memory I now saw not as an embarrassing error, but as fate's stubborn hand. He shook his head slowly, his gaze never leaving mine. I don't believe in love at first sight. Neither do I whispered, shifting closer on the bed, the world narrowing to the space between us. What I felt, that was something else entirely. I let my intention show in my eyes, in the slight part of my lips. He groaned, a soft, surrendering sound. Celine, I'm bruised everywhere. I won't be gentle. I leaned in, my breath ghosting over his mouth. That's okay, I murmured, closing the last inch between us. I'll be gentle enough for both of us. And as I kissed him, a kiss of healing and promise, I silently vowed that the bruises of the past would fade. The future was ours to mend. The night of the class reunion arrived with a low hum of tension. I spent the afternoon choosing an outfit not to impress old classmates, but to stand beside Cale. I chose a simple, elegant dark green dress that complemented his charcoal gray suit. He'd been quiet as we got ready, his movements precise, his eyes holding a stormy watchfulness. He wasn't a man who enjoyed crowds or pretension, but he was going for me. To stand his ground. We arrived late, intentionally. As we approached the private room of the upscale restaurant, laughter and loud voices spilled into the hallway. We paused just outside the closed door. Heard Julian got his face rearranged by Celine's mechanic. A male voice, smug and familiar. Probably Derek, who'd always been jealous of Julian. Serves him right. Always thought he was too good for us. A female voice, tinged with bitterness. But still, another voice chimed in, dripping with false pity. Can you imagine? Marrying a mechanic? She must be desperate. Or punishing herself. Total downgrade, Derek sneered. Julian said they fought over her. Bet she went crawling back and the guy caught them. Wouldn't blame him for hitting something. Laughter, crude and agreeing. With a body like Celine's, if she threw herself at him, what man could say no? The sound of that collective, ugly laughter was a white-hot brand against my skin. I felt Cale go rigid beside me, his hand tightening on the small of my back. Before he could move, I acted. I pushed the door open and walked straight in. The laughter died, strangled into awkward silence. 20 faces turned to me, expressions shifting from shock to feigned innocence. My eyes found the source. Derek, leaning back in his chair, and Lisa, who'd always coveted Julian's attention. Without a word, I walked to their table, picked up a half-full glass of red wine, and threw it directly into Derek's smirking face. The gasp that rippled through the room was almost comical. Red liquid dripped from Derek's hair, his nose, onto his expensive shirt. I turned slowly, my voice cold and clear. Why don't you all just say what you mean? That you think I'd rather marry an honest mechanic than end up with a lying, cheating, spineless man like Julian? Maybe then you'd understand his true worth. A stunned silence followed. Then Lisa sputtered, Celine, that's uncalled for. We're all friends here. Are we? I asked, my gaze sweeping the room. When you were tearing me apart behind my back, was that friendship? Or just petty gossip to make your own lives feel less mediocre? Before anyone could answer, a strained voice came from the corner. Celine. Outside. Now. Julian stood up. He looked gaunt, the shadow of his bruise still visible under careful makeup. The wine had missed him, but my words had hit their mark. I laughed, the sound sharp and humorless. Why should I go anywhere with you? Whatever you have to say, you can say it right here. In front of everyone. Go on, Julian. Tell them all how I've supposedly been begging you to come back. His jaw tightened. A few of his loyalists, sensing blood in the water, muttered encouragement. It's okay, man. Just tell the truth. I smiled, a predator's smile. Yes, Julian. Tell your truth. Let's clear the air. He just repeated stubbornly, outside. He took a step toward me, hand outstretched as if to grab my arm. I took a deliberate step back, raising my voice in mock alarm. Don't touch me, or they'll start saying I was throwing myself at you again. He froze, his face flushing with humiliation and rage. The room was utterly still, every eye darting between us. Since you won't talk, I said, turning toward the door, I will. I raised my voice. Honey, you can come in now. The door, which had been left ajar, pushed fully open. Cale walked in. The effect was immediate. He wasn't just a tall man in a suit. He carried a quiet, immovable authority. His broad shoulders filled the doorway, his sharp gaze taking in the scene, lingering on Julian for a fraction of a second before returning to me. He was effortlessly, fundamentally real in a room full of artifice. A whisper rippled through the women. Oh wow. That's her husband? Julian looks like a boy next to him. I saw Julian's face turn to stone. Kale walked to me, placing a slim laptop case on the table. I took out the small USB drive I'd carried with me for weeks, ever since Julian's first call. I plugged it in, my fingers steady. "You all seem very sure of my shamelessness," I said, my voice echoing in the quiet room. "So let's be clear about who's been chasing whom." I clicked play. The room filled with Julian's voice, smooth and pleading from my phone's recording. "Celine, it's me. I just want to see you. I came back for you." Then the audio from my doorstep, captured by my phone in my pocket. "Can I at least have a goodbye hug?" When it ended, the silence was profound. The faces that had been smirking were now carefully blank or openly shocked. The few who had defended Julian subtly pushed their chairs back, distancing themselves. I looked at them one by one. That's the truth. It's not complicated. I moved the cursor. And since we're on the subject of who attacked whom, I opened the video file from the auto shop's security system. The black and white footage was crystal clear. Julian storming in, yelling, sweeping a rack of tools to the floor with a violent swing. Kale standing with his hands slightly raised, trying to talk him down. Julian getting in his face, jabbing a finger at his chest. The audio was muffled, but Julian's third shout was discernible. "Worthless little." The slur was aimed at me. That's when Kale moved. One swift, controlled punch. Julian went down. I stopped the video. Self-defense. As the police determined. The narrative in the room had completely inverted. Then from the back, a woman's voice, hesitant but excited, piped up. "Wait, Kale Thorne? Did you go to Westfield High?" All heads turned. It was Chloe, a quiet girl who'd been in the art club. She was blushing, but her eyes were bright. Kale gave a single slow nod. Chloe's face lit up. "You were on the basketball team. That exhibition game against our school. Some of the girls and I snuck over to watch." She turned to me, grinning. "Celine, you don't remember? He kept looking over at our bleachers the whole game. We found out later he had a crush on someone in our class. He even passed a love letter through one of our guys." I blinked, my mind racing. I had no memory of this. None. Chloe winked. "It was for you, wasn't it?" I opened my mouth to deny it, but Kale spoke first, his voice calm and certain. "Yes. It was for her." The air left the room. All eyes swiveled to the class president, the messenger who had been responsible for passing notes between classes. Julian. His face had drained of all color, a sickly gray. Kale continued, his gaze locked on Julian. "I remember asking your class president to deliver it." He paused, letting the implication hang. "I wrote 10 letters. You told me she'd rejected everyone." My knees felt weak. 10 letters. A torrent of emotion, shock, betrayal, a dizzying sense of stolen history washed over me. I turned slowly to look at Julian, my voice a whisper. The first letter you ever gave me. The handwriting was so neat, so perfect. That was the day of the Westfield game." Julian's throat worked. "There's no proof. That was years ago." "But I have proof," I said, the pieces clicking into a devastating whole. "The first love letter Julian ever gave me was that day. I kept them. All of them. Every single one Julian ever gave me. I can go home right now and get them. We can compare the handwriting of the first one to the others. We can compare them to Kale's." Julian's mask finally crumbled. Anger and panic flashed in his eyes. "So what, Celine? Because I didn't marry you back then, you want to destroy me now?" The sheer audacity took my breath away. "You destroyed yourself, Julian. You stole his words. You built a lie. And when I moved on, you couldn't stand it." The murmurs in the room grew louder, turning from shock to condemnation. "He stole his letters? That's pathological. He was class president. What a fraud." Kale took a step toward Julian, his movement deceptively casual. He didn't need to roll up his sleeves. The threat was in his stillness. "We can save the revenge for later. Right now, I want to talk about those 10 letters." Julian, seeing his last bastion of support evaporate, made a jerky motion toward the door. Kale was faster. His hand shot out, clamping down on Julian's shoulder, forcing him back into his seat. "Explain," Kale said, the word a low command. Julian stiffened, his pride warring with his terror. "There's nothing to explain. It's her word against mine." "And mine," Kale stated. "And the letter she saved. And the fact that after graduation, you were the one who suggested switching to email." Because it was easier to control, wasn't it? A cold, final understanding settled over me. The charming, poetic Julian I'd fallen for had been a mirage, woven from another man's genuine feelings. The real Julian was the man who'd fled commitment, who'd married abroad on a whim, who was now unraveling because he couldn't bear not being the center of my story. "You're sick," I said, the words tasting like ash. "You're utterly sickening." That was the breaking point. The last of Julian's composure shattered. He shoved Cale's hand away and bolted from the room, shouldering past people, his exit as graceless as his deceit. In his wake, a stunned silence fell, then erupted into animated chatter. We were suddenly the center of a very different kind of attention. Chloe and the other women crowded around us, their earlier scorn replaced by starry-eyed fascination. "I can't believe it. It's like something out of a movie. Fate. It's literally fate, you too." Julian always gave me a weird vibe. This explains so much. Cale endured it with stoic patience, his hand a warm, possessive anchor on my lower back. We extricated ourselves as soon as it was politely possible. That night, in the quiet sanctuary of our home, something had shifted. A wall between us, built of my past and his doubts, had been irrevocably breached. As he kissed me, slow and deep, there was a new rawness, a vulnerability beneath his usual control. When he reached for the bedside drawer, I stopped his hand. I met his eyes in the dim light, thinking of the lost child, of the future I was determined to have. "Not tonight," I whispered. "And if something happens, so what?" He froze above me, his breath catching. "So what if you get pregnant?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Then we have the baby," I said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. The last of his restraint vanished. What followed was not just passion but a fusion, a claiming and a surrender that felt like rewriting our very DNA. It was a promise sealed in the dark. I don't remember falling asleep. I remember waking to a world of pain and blinding white light. Disoriented, I tried to move, but my body felt heavy, disconnected. "Celine? Can you hear me?" Cale's face swam into view above me, etched with lines of pure terror. His eyes were red-rimmed. The white light resolved into sterile ceiling panels. "Hospital. You wouldn't wake up," he said, his voice cracking. "I called an ambulance." Panic, cold and familiar, lanced through me. Too soon. It's too soon. The illness wasn't due for years. Had my interference accelerated it? "I'm fine," I managed, though my voice was a weak thread. "Just, you were a little too enthusiastic last night." He stared at me, then let out a choked sound that was half laugh, half sob. He buried his face in the sheets near my shoulder, his broad back shaking. "Only you," he muttered, his voice muffled. "Only you would say that now." I tried to smile. "You're too handsome. It's distracting. Ask the doctor when I can go home." The moment he left the room, my smile faded. The ghost of my first death was in this room, in the antiseptic smell, in the beep of monitors. I had been so happy, so focused on Julian and the past, that I'd almost forgotten the real enemy was inside me, silent and patient. In my first life, the diagnosis had come too late. The doctor had been clear. Earlier detection could have changed everything. The miscarriages, they'd been the first symptom, a cruel hint I'd misunderstood. And Cale had carried the guilt for all of it, believing my lie about the pills, blaming himself for not seeing the signs. I would not let that happen again. This time I would fight with every piece of knowledge I had. It took a long time for Cale to return. And he wasn't alone. My parents stood in the doorway. My mother, elegant and always perfectly composed, looked as if she'd been crying. My father, stern and imposing, had his arm around her shoulders, his own face pale. I hadn't spoken to them in over a year, not since the blow-up over the marriage. They had wanted a strategic union, a merging of fortunes. They got a mechanic. In my first life, my pride had kept me from them even as I died. I'd watched their grief at my funeral as a ghost, a distant, painful spectacle. Now they rushed in, my mother grasping my hand. "Baby," she whispered, her voice trembling with an emotion I'd rarely heard. "Why didn't you tell us you were sick?" I looked at Cale. He met my gaze, unapologetic. "I called them," he said quietly. "The doctor said it might be serious. I couldn't make the decisions alone." I closed my eyes. He was right. My parents had resources, connections. In my past life, My stubbornness had bankrupted Kale and doomed me. I couldn't let pride kill me twice. I opened my eyes and looked at my parents, really looked at them. They were older, fear stripping away their usual masks of control. Talk to the doctors, I said, my voice steady. Find out what we need to do. Whatever it takes to fix this, I'll do it. The relief on their faces was instantaneous. They sprang into action, my father on his phone, my mother speaking with a head nurse. Efficiency replaced hysteria. Kale simply sat back down beside me, taking my hand. He looked exhausted, but the terror in his eyes had been replaced by a grim, determined hope. He was letting them in for me. It was perhaps the greatest act of trust he'd ever shown. Later, after my parents had left to make arrangements, Kale helped me gather some things from home. At my insistence, we stopped at my old apartment, the one I'd lived in before our marriage. From the very back of my closet, behind boxes of old shoes, I pulled out a small, polished wooden keepsake box. I hadn't opened it in years. Inside, neatly bundled with faded ribbons, were the love letters from Julian. I ignored them, digging deeper. My fingers brushed against a smaller, thinner stack of envelopes hidden beneath. Plain stationery addressed in my own younger handwriting. Kale, watching me, frowned. What's that? My heart hammered. Nothing, I said, trying to close the box. His hand covered mine. Celine. I sighed, relinquishing. He pulled the small stack out. He opened the first one, his brow furrowed. As he read the first few lines, his expression shifted. The stern lines softened, his eyes widening with a dawning, incredulous recognition. He looked up at me, his voice hushed. These are replies. To my letters. I nodded, heat rising to my cheeks. I wrote them. After the exams were over. When I finally had time to think, to feel. I looked away. But by then everyone was leaving town. We were all on email. And I was too proud, too confused to send them to a boy from another school whose letters had supposedly stopped. He read each one slowly, carefully, as if they were ancient, sacred texts. When he finished, he didn't speak. He simply gathered them, his movements reverent, and placed them inside his own jacket pocket, close to his heart. He looked at me then, and in his eyes, I saw the last vestiges of the hurt, suspicious husband melt away. He saw the girl who had written those words, a girl he'd loved across a crowded gym and through stolen letters, a girl who had, in her own way, loved him back even before she knew his name. Celine, he said, his voice thick. He didn't need to say more. I reached for his hand. In this life, Kale, I promised, the words of vow, I will do better. I will love you better. He brought my fingers to his lips, his eyes holding mine. You already have. He shook his head, a faint, wondering smile on his face. I was wrong. Maybe I do believe in fate. And for the first time since I'd opened my eyes in our wedding bed, I felt the terrifying, beautiful uncertainty of a future truly unwritten. We had a battle ahead, a medical one, but we would fight it together with truth as our armor and a love that had, against all odds, survived death itself. The world narrowed to the stark, rhythmic reality of hospitals. Tests, scans, consultations with faces that blurred into a mosaic of professional concern. The diagnosis, when it came, was both a grim echo and a stunning reprieve. The same aggressive cellular betrayal that had killed me before, but caught in its earliest, most tentative stages. Stage 1. The word hung in the air, a tiny life raft in a vast ocean. The prognosis is excellent with immediate and aggressive treatment, the oncologist, a woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, told us. My parents flanked one side of the small office, Kale the other. The miscarriages you experienced were likely early warnings. Your body was trying to tell you something. I felt Kale flinch beside me. His hand holding mine tightened almost painfully. The ghost of my lie, I ended it myself, loomed between us. But the doctor's words were absolving us both. It wasn't malice or choice. It was biology. A faulty one we could now fight. My parents, to their credit, were transformed. The socialites who cared about mergers and appearances vanished, replaced by two terrified, fiercely determined people. Money was no object. The best hospital, the top specialist from a teaching hospital 2 states over. A private room, it was arranged with a few quiet phone calls. They fussed and hovered, and for the first time since childhood I let them. Kale was my rock and my shadow. He ran the auto shop in the mornings, delegating more than he ever had, and spent every afternoon and evening by my bed. He learned the nurses' names, the complicated schedule of medications, how to adjust my pillows just so. He read to me when I was too tired to look at a screen, his low, steady voice a balm during the worst of the nausea after chemo sessions. One evening, after a particularly brutal day, I was drifting in that strange chemical limbo. He was sitting in the chair beside me, sketching something in a notepad, a habit I hadn't known he had. I watched his profile, the intense focus, the way his brow furrowed. "What are you drawing?" I whispered. He turned the pad. It was a rough but recognizably elegant design for a crib, with intricate scrollwork along the sides. "For the future," he said simply, his voice rough. Tears, hot and sudden, welled in my eyes. He wasn't just fighting for my life. He was daring to dream of the life after. The child we'd lost twice over. I reached out and he took my hand, bringing it to his lips. "We'll fill that nursery," I said, the promise giving me strength. He nodded, a world of hope in that single gesture. "We will." My treatment was a 6-month siege. There were days of despair, of wanting to give up, when the poison in my veins felt worse than the disease. But Kale was there. Sometimes silent, sometimes telling me stories about the shop, about the ridiculous cars people brought in, about the stray cat that had taken up residence and terrorized his apprentices. He was my anchor to the normal world. My parents, in their way, anchored me to a different world. They brought familiar foods from my childhood when I could stomach them, fought with insurance on my behalf, and handled the mountain of paperwork that would have overwhelmed us. I saw for the first time the love that had always been there beneath their ambition and control. A love that had just expressed itself in the wrong language. 5 months in, I was allowed a weekend at home between cycles. The house felt different. Lived in. Kale had kept it immaculate, but there were signs of him everywhere. A coffee mug left by the sink, a magazine about classic cars on the sofa, his jacket slung over a chair. It felt like a home, not just a place we both happened to sleep. That weekend we didn't talk about illness. We watched bad movies and he made me a bland soup that was all I could manage. As we lay in bed, my head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, I spoke into the darkness. "I'm sorry," I said. The words felt too small for the canyon of regret I carried. "For what?" His fingers stroked my hair, grown thin and brittle from the treatment. "For everything. For the pills. For the lie about the baby. For being so cold. For not seeing you." He was silent for a long time. "I'm sorry too," he said finally, the words a rumble in his chest. "For not seeing that you were hurting. For not making you feel safe enough to tell me the truth. For letting my pride get in the way when you needed me." We held each other in the dark, two broken people offering forgiveness like a sacrament. The past was a ghost we were finally laying to rest. The final treatment was the worst. My body, exhausted, seemed to rebel against the last assault. I was hospitalized again, weak and feverish. Kale barely left the room, sleeping in the awful recliner, waking at my every sigh. My parents took shifts, a silent, united front. And then it was over. The poison stopped. My blood counts began the slow, agonizing climb back to normal. I was discharged, frail as a newborn bird, with a schedule of follow-ups and scans that would stretch for years. Recovery was its own kind of battle. Relearning my strength, dealing with the lingering fatigue they called chemo brain, watching my hair begin to grow back in soft, dark curls. Kale was endlessly patient. He built a routine for us. Gentle walks in the park, small, frequent meals, quiet evenings. The auto shop thrived under his delegated management. He'd hired a capable foreman, a gruff older man named Joe who respected Kale and ran a tight ship. A year after my last treatment, I got the news. Remission. No evidence of disease. The scam was clear. We celebrated quietly, just the two of us, with a home-cooked meal I managed to make myself. We didn't need fireworks. The simple fact of sitting across from each other, healthy with a future ahead, was celebration enough. It was a few months after that, on a sunny, ordinary Tuesday, that I realized I was late. A flutter of something that wasn't fear, wasn't quite joy. A profound, trembling possibility took hold. I bought a test, my hands shaking so badly I could barely open the box. 2 pink lines. Clear as day. I didn't tell him immediately. I waited until he came home, covered in the day's grime, smelling of engine oil and sweat. I met him at the door, the plastic stick held behind my back. "You're home early," he said, leaning down to kiss my forehead, his standard greeting now. I have something to show you, I said, my voice trembling. A flicker of concern crossed his face. Another scan? Is everything? I brought the test out, holding it up between us. He stared. He blinked. He took it from my hand, his rough, grease-stained fingers impossibly gentle on the plastic. He looked from the test to my face and back again. His eyes, those deep, steady pools, welled with tears that spilled over, tracing clean lines through the dust on his cheeks. He didn't speak. He couldn't. He just pulled me into his arms, burying his face in my neck, his big body shaking with silent, overwhelming sobs. I held him, my own tears mingling with his, feeling the circle of our lives click into place. This was the future we had fought for, bled for, nearly died for. From that moment, Cale became a man obsessed. He treated me as if I were made of spun glass and moonlight. He read every pregnancy book, attended every appointment, his large frame folding awkwardly into the small chairs in the obstetrician's waiting room. He asked more questions than I did. Is that normal? He'd ask, pointing to a diagram of the second trimester. Can she eat this? What about lifting? She shouldn't lift anything, right? The doctors and nurses found him endlessly amusing and deeply touching. My parents, now grandparents in waiting, were over the moon. My mother started knitting tiny, lopsided booties. My father began researching the safest car seats on the market. Our previously fractured family was healing, bound together by this new, fragile hope. As my belly swelled, so did our happiness. We painted the nursery together, a soft, warm gray, and Cale, true to his sketch, spent weeks in his workshop at the back of the garage, building the most beautiful, solid crib I'd ever seen. He'd sand the wood until it was silk smooth, his concentration absolute. It has to be perfect, he'd say. Nothing less for our kid. My due date came and went. I felt like a beached whale, enormous and impatient. At my 41-week checkup, the doctor recommended we come to the hospital for monitoring. Might be time to give nature a little nudge, she said with a smile. Cale drove with a careful, exaggerated slowness that made me laugh. I'm pregnant, not explosive, I teased. He just shook his head, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Humor me. The hospital was a familiar place, but this time the fear was different. A bright, sharp, anticipatory fear, not the dull dread of illness. As Cale helped me out of the car, I saw a familiar, stooped figure guiding a woman in a wheelchair toward the entrance. Julian. Time had not been kind. The polished, arrogant man was gone. He looked heavier, shoulders slumped under a cheap-looking jacket. His hair was thinning, lines of stress etched deep around his mouth. He was helping a woman, sharp-faced, eyes narrowed with perpetual dissatisfaction, who held a newborn wrapped in a pink blanket. A girl of about 10 or 11, blonde and timid-looking, trailed behind them, clutching a diaper bag. Our eyes met for a split second. A flash of shock, then a swift, profound shame crossed his face before he ducked his head, hurrying the woman along. She snapped at him, her voice carrying across the lot. What are you gawking at? Keep staring and I'll gouge your eyes out. She then turned to the little girl. Don't just stand there. Get back to the room and watch your brother. The girl flinched, shrinking behind Julian. Dad? She whispered, a world of pleading in that single word. Julian didn't look at her or at me again. He just mumbled something, his shoulders hunching further, and pushed the wheelchair faster toward the doors. I stood frozen, a cocktail of pity and revulsion swirling in my gut. Cale's arm came around me, solid and warm. Don't, he said softly, his voice calm. He's not worth a single thought. He guided me inside and with a quiet word to the receptionist, secured us a private suite far from the general maternity ward. He'd planned for everything. Later, I asked a nurse who confirmed the rumors I'd heard in fragments. Julian's business venture had collapsed spectacularly, leaving him in deep debt. He'd gotten involved with an older, wealthy widow to settle it. His wife overseas had found out, divorced him and left him with their daughter. Now he was trapped, a kept man in a miserable transactional marriage, his golden boy life reduced to ashes. My old classmates sometimes mentioned him with a sigh. He had it all. Threw it away. The universal conclusion was always, Celine, you dodged a missile. I looked across our private room. Cale was on the floor, assembling a portable bassinet with intense focus, our hospital bag neatly packed beside him. The soft evening light caught the silver just starting to thread through his dark hair at the temples, the sheer, solid competence of him. He looked up, caught me watching, and a smile, boyish, open, full of light, transformed his face. My heart swelled, too big for my chest. This was my life. This messy fought for a precious life. The first contraction hit an hour later, a deep, tightening wave. I gasped, and Cale was at my side in an instant, his hand finding mine. "It's time," I breathed. The fear in his eyes was instantly replaced by a steady, unwavering calm. He kissed my forehead. "I'm here," he said. "I'm right here. Let's go meet our future." And as the waves of pain and effort began to carry me away, his hand was the only anchor I needed. The past was a closed book. The present was pain and promise. The future was a tiny, crying, perfect thing, placed gently on my chest moments later, as Cale wept openly beside me, his tears falling on our daughter's downy head. Her name was Alara, meaning light. And she was the light after a long, long darkness for both of us. As I held her, exhausted and euphoric, with Cale's arms around us both, I knew the final ghost had been laid to rest. We had not just survived. We had chosen each other, fought for each other, and built something beautiful from the ruins of two broken lives. This was not a second chance. This was a new world. And we were just beginning. Blair was a quiet baby. She had Cale's solemn dark eyes and a dusting of my dark hair. She didn't cry often, but when she did, it was a determined, hiccuping sound that brought Cale running from any corner of the house. Watching him, a giant of a man made gentle by 8 pounds of newborn, was a constant, heart-swelling revelation. He could disassemble a transmission with ruthless efficiency, but he handled her as if she were constructed of soap bubbles and starlight. My recovery from childbirth was a breeze compared to the medical trenches we'd just left. The fatigue was a healthy, earned tiredness, not the toxic exhaustion of treatment. Cale had taken a full month off work. Joe, his foreman, called every other day with updates, his gruff voice tinged with pride. "Shop's fine, boss. You just focus on that little girl." My parents became fixtures in our home. My mother, who had once debated the merits of French versus Italian couture, now debated diaper brands and swaddling techniques. She'd rock Alara for hours, singing old lullabies in a soft, off-key voice I'd never heard. My father, the negotiator, had taken it upon himself to baby-proof the world. He installed extra locks, outlet covers, and a state-of-the-art monitoring system that could probably detect a moth's heartbeat. He'd sit for long periods just watching Alara sleep, his stern face softened into something resembling awe. One afternoon, as my mother washed bottles and my father pretended to read the paper while actually watching Cale give Alara a bottle, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. This was the family I'd always wanted but had been too angry and hurt to build. The only shadow, faint and distant, was the knowledge of my own body's history. Remission wasn't a cure. It was a vigilant truce. I went for my checkups religiously, each scan a silent prayer. Cale came to everyone, holding my hand in the waiting room, his calm a fortress against my inner tremors. So far the truce held. When Alara was 6 months old, we decided to christen the auto shop in a new way. Cale had built a small, fenced-in play area in the corner of his office, complete with a soft mat and a mobile of little carved wooden cars. I started bringing her there a few afternoons a week. The rumble of machinery and the smell of oil became the soundtrack of her infancy. The mechanics, burly men with tattooed arms, would scrub their hands raw before peeking at her, speaking in comically high-pitched voices. She became the shop's mascot. Life developed a rhythm. A sweet, ordinary rhythm. Mornings were a chaotic ballet of feeding, dressing, and trying to get out the door. Evenings were warm baths, story time in Cale's lap, and the deep, contented silence of a sleeping house. One such evening, with Alara finally down, we sat on the couch. I was leaning against Cale, his arm around me, tracing idle patterns on the back of his hand. "Do you ever think about it?" I asked quietly. The day before. He knew what I meant. The first life. The coldness, the sickness, the death he'd witnessed. He was silent for a long moment, his chest rising and falling steadily beneath my cheek. "Every day," he said finally, his voice a low rumble. "But not like I used to. Before I thought about what I lost. What I did wrong. Well, I think about how it brought me here. To this." He tightened his arm around me, his gaze drifting to the baby monitor where a small, fuzzy shape slept peacefully. I wouldn't change the pain if it meant losing this. Not for anything. I turned my face into his shoulder, breathing him in. I would, I whispered. I'd change all the pain I caused you. In a heartbeat. He kissed the top of my head. I know. But we can't. And maybe we shouldn't. The cracks are where the light gets in, right? It was the most poetic thing I'd ever heard him say. I looked up at him, my eyes brimming. Since when are you so wise? He gave a small, sheepish shrug. Since I almost lost you twice. It focuses the mind. We sat in comfortable silence, wrapped in the miracle of our ordinary night. The past was a closed wound, tender but healed. Alara's first birthday was a joyous, chaotic affair. The small house was packed with my parents, a few of the mechanics and their families, Leo, who cried when Alara smeared cake on his face, and even Chloe from the reunion who'd become a casual friend. The play area was a sea of wrapping paper and excited toddlers. Kale manned the grill in the backyard, the king of his domain, a smile permanently etched on his face as he watched me chase our giggling daughter. In the middle of the chaos, my phone buzzed with a reminder for my quarterly scan scheduled for the following week. A cold trickle of anxiety pierced the warm bubble of the day. I pushed it down, determined not to let the old fear poison this new happiness. The day of the scan arrived. Kale as always came with me. We'd developed a ritual. We'd get awful hospital coffee afterwards no matter the result and sit in the little courtyard. It was our way of claiming a piece of the place, of not letting it hold power over us. This time the radiologist called us back in after the scan, her face unreadable. The scan is clear, she said, and we both exhaled. But there's something else. A shadow on your liver. Very small. Almost certainly a benign hemangioma, a little cluster of blood vessels. They're common, especially post-pregnancy. But given your history, we'd like to do an MRI to be absolutely certain. The ground didn't fall away, but it tilted. A shadow. The word was a ghost from a bad dream. Kale's hand found mine, his grip iron strong. When can we do it? He asked, his voice betraying none of the fear I knew was coursing through him. We can schedule it for tomorrow. The 24-hour wait was an eternity wrapped in a minute. We went through the motions of the day, feeding Alara, playing with her, putting her to bed, but a silent, screaming tension stretched between us. We didn't talk about it. There was nothing to say until we knew. That night, after Alara was asleep, I broke. Sitting at the kitchen table, I put my head in my hands. What if it's back? The words were a mere breath, the worst fear-given voice. Kale pulled a chair close, his knees bumping mine. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He just took my hands, pulling them away from my face. Then we fight it, he said, his eyes holding mine with an intensity that was both fierce and tender. Just like we did before. But this time we catch it even earlier. And this time, he glanced toward the nursery, we have her. We have a reason to fight that's even bigger than us. His certainty was a rock in my swirling dread. He wasn't denying the possibility, he was defining our response to it. We were a team. A fortress. The MRI was a claustrophobic, noisy ordeal. Afterward, we were told the results would take a few hours. We couldn't bear to go home to the empty-feeling house, so we drove to the park. We walked in silence for a while, the autumn leaves crunching under our feet. Do you remember, I said suddenly, the first thing you ever said to me? At the cafe when I sat down at your table by mistake. A faint smile touched his lips. You said, "Hi, I'm Celine. I'm assuming you're my date for the afternoon." And you looked so defiant, like you were expecting me to be disappointed. And what did you say? I said, "I'm Kale. And the coffee's already cold, but I'll order more." He shook his head. I was so thrown. You were the most beautiful, angry creature I'd ever seen. And you weren't even there for me. But I was, I said softly, stopping to face him. Even if I didn't know it. I was there for you. He cupped my face, his thumbs brushing my cheeks. You are my greatest accident. My best mistake. My phone rang, the hospital's number flashing on the screen. My blood turned to ice. I fumbled to answer, putting it on speaker. Mrs. Thorne? It's Dr. Evans. I have your MRI results. The world narrowed to the tinny voice from the speaker. It's exactly what we suspected, she said, her tone warm with relief. A benign hepatic hemangioma. Nothing to worry about. Your oncology scan remains clear. You're fine. The air rushed back into my lungs in a sob. Kale's arms were around me before the phone was back in my pocket, crushing me to his chest. We stood there in the middle of the park path, shaking, laughing through tears, two survivors who had faced the phantom of their worst fear and lived to tell the tale. Let's go home, I whispered into his jacket. I want to see our daughter. Life after the false alarm felt brighter, sweeter, as if we'd passed another test. Alara grew from a baby to a toddler with a shocking, delightful speed. She had Kale's quiet observation but my stubborn will. She would sit for ages, intently watching him sketch a design for a custom car part, her little brow furrowed in imitation. Then she'd dismantle a block tower with a gleeful shout. The auto shop flourished. Kale's reputation for honest, meticulous work had spread. He started taking on more custom restoration projects, work that fed his artist soul. I saw a new light in him, a creative fulfillment that went beyond fixing broken things to making beautiful things whole again. I too found a new path. My near brush with mortality, coupled with the sheer miracle of Alara, had changed me. I went back to school online studying child psychology. I wanted to understand the little mind growing before my eyes, and perhaps help other families navigating trauma. Kale supported me utterly, taking over bedtime duties during my exam weeks, his quiet pride in me a constant fuel. We fell into a new kind of love. Not the desperate, passionate fire of our reconciliation, nor the quiet, painful endurance of our first life. This was a deep, steady current. A partnership built on shared survival, mutual respect, and the boundless, messy joy of raising a child together. We were architects of a life, and every day felt like laying another brick in a beautiful, sturdy home. When Alara was 3, we took a family trip to the coast. It was the first real vacation for all of us. We stayed in a little cabin by the sea. Alara was terrified of the waves at first, clinging to Kale's neck, but by the end of the week she was chasing seagulls with fearless delight, her squeals carried away by the wind. On our last night we built a small fire on the beach. Alara, exhausted and sandy, fell asleep in my lap, wrapped in a blanket. Kale sat beside us, poking the fire with a stick, the flames painting his profile in golden shadow. I never used to think about the future, he said quietly, watching the embers spiral up into the starry black sky. It was just, the next day, the next job. Then for a while the future was something I was afraid of. Something I was going to have to face without you. He looked at me then, his eyes reflecting the firelight. Now I think about it all the time. I think about teaching her to drive. About her first heartbreak. About walking her down an aisle, maybe. I think about growing old with you on a porch somewhere, annoying you with my snoring. Tears welled in my eyes, but they were happy tears. The future was no longer a threat or a blank void. It was a landscape rich and detailed that we would explore together. I think about that too, I said, my voice thick. All of it. Especially the snoring. He smiled, that rare full smile that still made my heart skip. He leaned over and kissed me, a soft, salty kiss that tasted of sea air and wood smoke and forever. Alara stirred in my arms. Daddy, she mumbled sleepily. Right here, little star, he said, his voice impossibly gentle. She reached a small, sandy hand out and patted his cheek. Love you. He closed his eyes for a second as if absorbing the words directly into his soul. I love you too, baby. More than anything. We sat there as the fire died down to glowing coals, the three of us wrapped together against the vastness of the night and the ocean. The ghosts were silent. The past was a story we had survived. The present was this perfect, fleeting moment held gently in our hands. And the future? The future was a wide-open road, stretching out under a sky full of stars, waiting for us to drive into it together. Years have a way of folding into themselves. The frantic, luminous days of Alara's toddlerhood softened into the more structured chaos of childhood. She started school, a tiny figure with a backpack almost as big as she was, marching into a world that existed beyond our living room and the auto shop. Each milestone, the first wobbly tooth, the first solo bike ride without training wheels, Kale ran alongside her, a silent, anxious shadow, felt like a victory we'd all earned. My studies in child psychology became a career. I started working part-time at a family counseling center, specializing in helping children and parents navigate illness and loss. It was healing in a way I hadn't expected. I could sit with a terrified mother and say with absolute honesty, I understand. The fear is a monster, but you can learn to live alongside it. My own story, carefully anonymized, became a tool to offer hope. Kale was my fiercest advocate, bragging about me to customers in a way that made me blush. The auto shop, Thorn and Son Precision Auto, now had a second bay. The and Son was wishful thinking. Elara showed zero interest in engines, preferring to draw fantastical creatures in the office. But the expansion was a testament to Kale's success. He'd taken on a partner, a brilliant young engineer named Matteo who shared his passion for restoration. They were working on a 1967 Mustang, a skeletal frame slowly being reborn into gleaming metal and purring horsepower. It was Kale's masterpiece, a labor of love he tinkered with on weekends. Our life settled into a rhythm that was deeply satisfying. Weekday mornings were a coordinated dance of lunchboxes and permission slips. Evenings were homework at the kitchen table, my child psych textbooks often stacked next to Elara's math worksheets. Weekends were for family, trips to the science museum, hikes in the hills, or simply puttering around the house while Kale and Matteo made deafening progress on the Mustang in the detached garage he'd built out back. The shadow of my illness never fully left, but it receded, becoming a familiar shape in the periphery, like a tree you know is there in the dark. My checkups remained clear. The annual scan was a day of low-grade anxiety we'd ritualized into something manageable. Scan in the morning, a fancy lunch after, a quiet evening, just the two of us. It was our annual reckoning, and so far we'd won every time. One crisp Saturday afternoon in early spring, when Elara was 7, our domestic peace was interrupted by the doorbell. It was an unfamiliar sound. Our friends usually just walked in. I opened the door to find Julian standing on our porch. The years had deepened the lines of defeat I'd glimpsed at the hospital. He was thinner now, almost gaunt, his expensive clothes replaced by a faded polo shirt and trousers that hung loosely. He carried the weary, shrunken air of a man who has been thoroughly beaten by life. The arrogant glint was long gone from his eyes. In its place was a hollow, desperate weariness. My body went cold, then hot with a protective fury. I stepped out, pulling the door mostly closed behind me. "What are you doing here, Julian?" He flinched at my tone, his hands twisting together. "Celine. I know I have no right. I needed to see you. To talk to you. We have nothing to talk about. You need to leave." My voice was steel. "Please," he whispered, the word ragged. "Just 5 minutes. I'm leaving. For good. Moving back overseas. To try to patch things up with my daughter's mother. It's a long shot, but..." He trailed off, his gaze drifting over my shoulder into the warm, lived-in space of our home. I saw the stark, painful contrast reflected in his eyes. His ruin, our peace. A part of me, the part that remembered the ghost of the hopeful girl who'd loved him, felt a pang of pity. But it was a small, distant thing, quickly smothered by the fierce love I had for the life he'd tried to destroy. "I'm sorry for how things turned out for you, Julian," I said, and I meant it. "But your path and mine diverged a long time ago. There's no intersection anymore. Not even for 5 minutes. He nodded as if he'd expected nothing less. His shoulders slumped further. "He's a good man, isn't he, Kale?" It wasn't a question. It was an acknowledgement, a final surrender. "The best," I said without hesitation. He managed a faint, ghastly smile. I always knew. Even when I was stealing his words. I knew they came from a better man. He took a step back off the porch. "Goodbye, Celine. Be happy. You deserve it." He turned and walked down the path to a battered sedan. He didn't look back. I watched him go, feeling the last spectral thread of that old life snap and drift away on the spring breeze. There was no triumph in it, only a quiet, solemn finality. That chapter was not just closed. The book itself had turned to dust. I went inside. Kale was in the kitchen fixing a snack for Elara. He looked up, his eyes instantly reading my face. "Who was it?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Julian," I said, leaning against the counter. "Saying goodbye. He's leaving the country." Kale's jaw tightened briefly, then relaxed. He put down the knife, wiped his hands on a towel, and came to me. He didn't ask what was said. He just wrapped his arms around me, pulling me into the solid, sure haven of his embrace. He rested his chin on top of my head. "Okay," he said simply. And that was it. No drama, no interrogation. just an understanding that a door had been sealed forever, and he was the home I was standing in. Alara came barreling into the kitchen then, clutching a drawing. "Look. It's our family." The drawing showed 3 stick figures with giant smiles, standing in front of a lopsided house. Next to the tallest figure she'd drawn a squiggly, majestic-looking cat. "That's Mr. Wrench," she announced, pointing to the cat. Mr. Wrench was the shop's fat, imperious tabby. Kale and I looked at each other over her head, and the last of the chill from the doorstep vanished, melted away by the pure, bright warmth of our daughter's world. Later that year, on the anniversary of my remission, a date we privately celebrated more fervently than any birthday, Kale came home with a flat, wrapped package. "For you," he said, his eyes shining with a secret. I unwrapped it. It was a framed piece of art, but not a print. It was a beautiful, intricate pen and ink drawing. It depicted a mechanic's shop, but rendered with magical realism. Wrenches and sockets were arranged like constellations in a sky above the bay door. A classic car, half restored, gleamed under a canopy of flowering vines. And in the foreground, sitting on a workbench, was a family of 3 stylized figures, their features simple but filled with love. In the corner, in his precise block lettering, he'd written, "For Celine. Our garage. Our universe." Tears blurred my vision. "You drew this?" He nodded, suddenly shy. "Mateo's been teaching me some digital design for the shop. I've been practicing. This is from my head. Our life." It was the most beautiful gift I'd ever received. It wasn't just a picture. It was his soul offered up on paper. His love, which had once been expressed in silent prayers and unread letters, now had a shape, a form anyone could see. I hung it in the center of our living room wall. It became the heart of our home. Time continued its steady march. Alara turned 10. She was less a child and more a person now, with strong opinions on social justice, a passion for marine biology, and a withering preteen eye roll she'd perfected. My work at the center was fulfilling, and I was asked to lead a support group for long-term survivors. Kale's Mustang was finally finished, a roaring, sapphire-blue testament to patience and skill. He took me for a drive on my birthday, the wind whipping through our hair, his hand resting on my thigh, his face alight with a pure, uncomplicated joy. One evening, when Alara was at a friend's house, we were cleaning out the garage, a monumental task we'd avoided for years. In a box of old financial papers, my hand brushed against a familiar, smooth surface. I pulled out a small, polished wooden box. The keepsake box. My breath hitched. Kale, sorting through spark plugs nearby, glanced over. I sat on an overturned bucket and opened it. On top were the bundles of letters from Julian, the ribbons now brittle. I set them aside without a second glance. Beneath them, nestled in faded tissue paper, were the letters I'd written to Kale all those years ago, the unsent replies. And beneath those, something new. A small, folded sheaf of papers, covered in Kale's handwriting. I looked up at him, questioning. He wiped his hands on his jeans and came to sit on the floor beside me. "I found those when we moved your stuff from the old apartment," he said quietly. "After you got sick. I kept them." And I started writing back. To the girl who wrote those. To the woman she became. "I never gave them to you. They felt private. For me." With trembling fingers, I unfolded the first page. It was dated just after my final chemotherapy treatment. "Dear Celine of the past and the present and the future. You asked in your letter if I believed in destiny. I didn't then. I do now. Not a gentle fate, but a stubborn one. One that kept pushing me toward you even when you and I pushed back. You asked what love feels like. For me, it feels like watching you sleep after a long shift, knowing I'd work 1,000 more if it meant coming home to this. Feels like fear, a cold knife when I think of that scan. But it also feels like a fire banked deep that nothing can put out. Not even time." I couldn't read anymore. The tears were coming too fast. I leaned into him, the letters clutched to my chest, weeping for the long, twisted, beautiful road that had brought us here, to a dusty garage floor surrounded by the tangible evidence of our shared life. His tools, my old boxes, the ghost of a Mustang that had been reborn. He held me, his lips against my temple. "We made it, Celine," he murmured into my hair. "Through all of it. We're here." And we were. Not just surviving but thriving. Building a life not in spite of our past, but woven through with its threads. the dark strands of grief and sickness making the bright ones of love and recovery shine all the brighter. The garage was still a mess. The future still held unknowns. My health, Ilara's teenage years, the inevitable wrinkles and aches of growing old. But as we sat there amidst the clutter of our shared history, I felt an unshakable certainty. We had faced the worst the universe could throw at us: betrayal, illness, death itself, and we had chosen each other again and again. We had built a family, a home, a love that was both a shelter and an adventure. The story wasn't about a vengeful rebirth anymore. It was simpler and far more profound. It was the story of two people who learned against all odds how to heal, how to trust, how to build a garage that could contain an entire universe. And as Kale helped me to my feet, his hand warm and sure in mine, I knew the best chapters weren't behind us in some remembered past or a rewritten future. They were right now, in this messy, glorious, perfectly ordinary present. And in every present still to come. The end.